Hello, everyone. Welcome. It's nice to see so many people joining the meeting room. We are just giving it about 2 more minutes to let everyone in. So you're in the right place for the book talk. We'll just be starting right at 7:02. For everyone just joining, you're in the right place for the book talk. We're just giving everyone about 1 more minute to get settled into the room virtually, and then we'll get started with the book talk. Hi, everyone. Just getting set up here. All right, I'll remove that for now. I'll leave it like this for now. Hi, everyone. Thank you for joining us in the meeting room. Hello to everyone that may be watching from YouTube. Good evening, and thank you for joining the Center for International Stabilization and Recovery for our Global Humanitarian Week. This is held virtually this year, obviously. CISR is a unique entity here at JMU. As we work with JMU students and faculty, the US Department of State, and with various other international partners around the world on our projects, which include trainings and publications. In addition to publishing To Walk the Earth in Safety in the Journal of Conventional Weapons Destruction, both funded by the US Department of State Bureau of Weapons Removal and Abatement, and which many JMU students have actually served on throughout those years, CISR has also held various senior managers courses on both JMU's campus and abroad in Vietnam, Croatia, and Tajikistan, as well as managing international programs and trainings on disability rights, peer support, and minor risk education. So that said, there are many ways to get involved at CISR and beyond. If the topics we discussed today interest you, we highly recommend checking out our fellowship program in collaboration with the US Department of State. In a moment, you'll see a slide with some information about our fellowship. The Phaedra Cruzel Drew Memorial Fellowship is a paid 2-year professional development opportunity. There are the details there. So take a moment to read the details about this. I encourage you to save these details if you're interested, and you can also find more information on CISR's website. And finally, just a few housekeeping items before we begin. For those students who are here for passport stamps, please take a screenshot of the passport stamp slide shown at the end of the event. We will also have an opportunity for questions and answers. For those in the Zoom meeting, throughout the talk, you can send your questions to the host via the chat function. And for those watching via YouTube, you can leave a question in the comments. We are very excited to talk today with Dr. Yvan Yenda Ilunga. Yvan, would you like to turn on your screen and welcome. We're very excited to have you with us today. Dr. Yvan Yenda Ilunga is a visiting assistant professor of political science at Providence College and an instructor of political science at James Madison University. He holds a PhD in global affairs from Rutgers University. His research agenda broadly focuses on international relations, security, peace, and development, but more specifically on questions related to humanitarian action, civil-military interactions, natural resource-based conflicts, peace operations, regional cooperation and security, and economic and social sustainability. Dr. Ilunga is a member of the Joint Civil-Military Interaction Research and Education Network, as well as a member of the Effectiveness of Peace Operations Network. He's the author of the book, Humanitarianism and Security, Trouble and Hope at the Heart of Africa. Welcome.
Thank you so much for having me.
Yeah, we're very excited to be here and having opportunity to talk not just a scholar at James Madison University, but really a wealth of experience on so many of these topics. So just to begin, for our audience members unfamiliar with the book, can you provide us with an overview and an overview as well of the security and peace dynamics in Central Africa?
Great, thank you so much. And if you would allow me to start by giving an overview on security and peace in Central African Republic, the Central African region, and then give an overview of the book. First of all, when it comes to issues of security and stability, and as well as peace in Central African region, to be more specific, when I talk about Central African region, unlike basically 9 countries plus 1. So here, the central one is the Democratic Republic of Congo, which is surrounded by 9 countries, including Rwanda, Burundi, Uganda, South Sudan, Central African Republic, Congo Brazzaville. On the southern side, you have Zambia, and on the eastern side, among others, you have Tanzania. So basically, I'm talking about that region, which is also known to some extent as the Great Lakes region. So going back into a short kind of a recent past, one would have probably to remember 2 major events. One is the Rwandan genocide, which created a trend of humanitarian crisis as well as regional instability by giving rise to certain armed groups and ongoing malicious groups as well operating in the region. That led also to the First and the Second Congo War, which was characterized back then by massive human rights violations as well as ongoing violence, which the estimate is around 7 to 8 million people who died through the conflict. And not only the conflict occurred, instability is also occurred, and fragilities of institutions are happening right now. And on the northern part, you have Central African Republic, which is very fragile and continues to experience ongoing institutional instabilities and conflict. And you have also another country, which is South Sudan, which has just gone the past year or so through a peace accord, which we're having and hoping that it will bring peace and stability. So this is kind of a quick overview of the security dynamics in the region, where you don't only have one country which is fragilized, but you have several countries around the region going through conflict, instabilities and fragilities, and sometimes lack of proper and strong leadership. So, and one conflict often kind of has regional implications, such as the one in the DRC. Once the DRC is unstable, you have other countries as well in the region that will be unstable. So this is the dynamic, and the instability is key words there. So going now to the book. So the book, Humanitarianism and Security, and purposely saying trouble and hope, at the heart of Africa, with hope has a key word there too, saying, of course, the situations right now might be appearing as a situation of fragility and stability, but we can still hope for better days, and we are allowed to hope for change. So the book itself speaks to a dynamic of a humanitarian crisis, but more specifically to the issues of transition within humanitarian crisis from short-term relief or programs to more long-term design and sustainability. And there are a couple of focus that I have there. One is, for instance, the issues of refugee crisis, and I look at dynamics about that as well, institutions, and as well as the military integration and disarmament component as well. So the book speaks to the region, but of course the issues that are highlighted in the book can also be transposed in other regions that continue to experience similar instabilities and similar crises. Yeah.
Thank you for that overview. And it certainly is such a big topic that you were able to kind of capture into this one book. So what inspired you to turn your scholarly work into a book? How did this take shape?
Well, that's an interesting question. I grew up in the DRC, so I was born there, and so some of these realities that I'm highlighting in the book are kind of first-hand experience, and also the work that I did in the region as well as in the Southern African region. So they have been part of my work for the past, I would say, 16 years. So getting a sense of first-hand experience and ongoing observation and research on this, I felt like it was important to put them into right context. And to put them into right context, I have to say that this book is a result of my PhD dissertation. So basically, it's my PhD dissertation, which has been transformed in the book. So I worked on that. I conducted years of research and so on. But the interesting part, I think the motivation for turning this into book, I had a chance and the privilege of working with a supervisor who has written a lot of books and used to tell me that, hey, your knowledge needs to be out there. That one kind of excitement and motivation, but the reality also within the balance of how to balance the academic work as well as the policy and other work was that if this book had to stay, right, only within the dissertation space, very few people would want to go to universities and then check for it in the libraries and then see how to read dissertations and so on. So I realized that it was knowledge that needed to be public. And of course, I agree that the dissertations are also kind of knowledge that are public, but the accessibility of them are sometimes very limited. But I wanted to not only put it public, but also to create a space where we can engage more on these critical questions in the sense that we can turn the conversation from academic conversation, from policy conversation to real life conversation, and see how whatever we study and write as academicians is applicable to our lives and get sense of connecting academic knowledge to life experiences and the day-to-day experience. So these are some of the personal motivations that I had of turning this work into a book.
That's interesting. And I know we have a ton of JMU students listening in. So I think that's a great example of, your research doesn't just, stay in the JMU library or stay somewhere, but how it can practically contribute to world problems.
Right.
So you're sharing with us a brief excerpt from your book now. Before you begin, can you share some context about the passage and why you chose it?
Great. So I will share one, but the context, it will be just one short paragraph. I think it speaks volumes to the need for what I emphasize in the book of the need for institutional reform and the ability to see humanitarian work differently. The past experiences of crisis and instabilities and the past efforts that were put into it show that our models of intervention haven't worked. So because the work has become more dynamic, but yet institutions that project and promote humanitarian work tend to be more static and rigid in terms of changing to adapt to realities. So this is one of that I would say a wake-up call, but also a reflection on how to go about and what we can bring at the table in this new context of humanitarianism and changing natures of security and stability. So this is within the book, and it's chapter 3 of the book, and actually the opening paragraph, which is, for those who happen to have the book, is in chapter 43. So I will read this quickly. Is that traditional analysis of humanitarian assistance and interventions focuses on issues pertaining to human rights violations, social and economic sustainability, and political stability and security. The politics of assistance have failed to develop strong intervention mechanisms that treat issues of identity crisis as an important parameter in humanitarian assistance and recovery. It will be incomplete or ineffective to try to understand and resolve any humanitarian crisis, especially one that has led to massive forced migrations into refugee camps, while neglecting to address the issues of social identity among refugees or internally displaced people. Based on this premise, in this chapter, I provide a new analysis of identity in the broader context of humanitarian assistance in fragile and post-conflict states. This analysis put forth the elements of denationalization, depatriotization, and the crisis of hybrid identity as critical considerations in humanitarian efforts that aim to restore communities and provide aid to those in camps. Knowing that there is a difference between social and political constructs of identity, in this analysis, I further suggest the consideration of the Pan-Africanism identity as a potentially inclusive identity to be embraced during the refugee crisis. This argument assumes that such an identity would progressively sanction the hand of the predominance of the state-centered identity, which is mainly political rather than social and cultural. Yes.
Thank you. That was an especially interesting chapter, I thought, and thinking of those like with the comparison to people feeling nationalistic or feeling strong connections to their nation and actual the refugee experience of the denationalization and what that identity means. Right. So sort of related to that, for our next question, we are going to be discussing gender and diversity, identity, and humanitarianism. What did you learn on these topics when writing your book?
Well, those topics are very important, and I must acknowledge that while I did this research, I had very little attention, unfortunately, on issues of gender, which I sometimes try to blame myself, but also remind myself that this is an ongoing conversation, so there is still room for more research on that. But the clarity on that is that issues of gender is critical, but not much is being done, especially on how to connect gender dynamics with humanitarian crisis, but also humanitarian work. You will understand that the focus on gender is more on the side of humanitarian workers. So it's the idea of recruiting a diverse workforce that we can deploy on the ground and make it more kind of reflective of the realities of those who are in refugee camps or who are in camps as internally displaced people. But within the responses that are being provided to those in distress, refugees and IDPs, there is a gap at that level. One is the gap, what I consider as a gap at the infrastructural level. So in the making of the camps, very few have that sensitivity to this dynamics of gender. For instance, the way one would want to build bathrooms and the one would want to build rooms and so on. So that dynamics is often overlooked. And I think it's critical to start thinking about that. And also understanding that the need of refugees, women, is different from the need of refugee men. But when you see the identification of refugees comes as a broader and an inclusive term and identity without considering it into its particularities. The need, for instance, for children as refugees will definitely be different from the needs of adults. But in the camp, you don't have that, you don't see that coming out strongly. So there is kind of a need for that one element. So this leads me to the second point, which is diversity, right? And diversity, I want to push it probably a little bit further beyond diversity on the makeup of groups. But I want to talk more also on diversity of approaches and diversity of philosophy of camps and diversity of philosophy of humanitarianism. Because at the end of it, when we talk about humanitarian work, we see the baseline is saving lives, right? And it should be people-centered. So that also requires that we develop a certain diverse perspective. And sometimes I always ask myself, even during the research, I was asking myself this question of whose assistance is this? And who define the needs, for instance? Who speaks to the framework, humanitarian framework? Who has the power to condition the type of assistance, the type of framework that needs to be in place? So, and that is another dimension that I wanted to highlight is the diversity of ideology, diversity of theory, and diversity probably of framework, which has to be people-centered and also victim-centered. In other words, those who are in need should inform the way we respond to their need, and not the other way around. As we notice the need, and then as it has, we notice, I think more kind of international institutions, even some government, we tend to think and strategize without those in need. And that, I think, is a call for diversity. I know probably this is not very much in the context of many scholars and different practitioners who think about diversity. So we think more of diversity in terms of who is actively being deployed and how many people are being represented and what are the background in terms of race, ethnicities, and so on. Those are some logistical dimensions, which I don't think speaks actually more to the needs on the ground. So there is the need for a diverse perspective on how to respond to these concerns or these issues. And then to the third point of humanitarianism, I think the last practice and the whole last practice of humanitarianism has failed us. And that was actually one of the key elements that I started with this book and my own research was that I started by asking one question. Why is it that despite the years of international interventions in the DRC, the Congo, where you have the largest peacekeeping missions, you have thousands of humanitarian agencies, you have hundreds of thousands of, development organizations, local as well as international. Why is it that over 20 years and plus, the crisis is still there? And what are we doing wrong? And how can we address it in the right way? So that brought me to the question actually of rejecting the traditional humanitarian framework. And I started trying to rebuild it. And what thing I'm sure of and I've learned over the years is that our strategies, the traditional strategies, are not very much relevant to the needs on the ground. There is a clear request and clear call for change. There is a need for adaptation. There is a need for flexibility, and there is a need for rethinking humanitarianism, because it's no longer just an objective and neutral and objective field. It has become very much politicized, that sometimes we miss the point of doing humanitarian work. Yeah.
Thank you. I'm sure we will get a lot of questions on follow-up, and I have 2 more left for those in the audience. So switching gears slightly, we may have those who are interested in the book writing or writing process itself. So what was the publication process like, and what advice would you give to scholars and students who are looking to publish their work?
Well, apparently it depends on the target, right? So you have to know your audience, and you need to know why you're, first of all, trying to publish your work. I think many people have great work, great resources, but they don't know why they want it. So that's why we have many books that are great, but never are present in spaces, right? Because it was just kind of a feeling of, I want this knowledge out, and then I've written it for years. I have my my notebooks well packed. I can just write them and then have them and then start a new project. I guess that is not a great call. I think the first thing that I will probably tell to anyone who is passionate about what they do and what they want to put out there, I think you have to be connected to your work first. You know, the wrong thing, well, I know we have some colleagues, academicians here, but I have to say it's the wrong thing sometimes within academia is that we count publications, but we don't count attachments to the knowledge that we share, you know. And I think it could be great to start by valuing and seeing why this particular area interests me, and then start building on that. And in terms of a book process or publication process, the advantage of this work, at least this second book, this is my second book, by the way, so was that when I started writing it as a PhD dissertation, we agreed with my supervisor that it would be a book. So the way we set up chapters, research and development was with that in mind. But of course, I have some other colleagues who do different approaches in writing, so that might take another route and different exercise to transform your work into a book. But if you know that what you want to do is a book, then from the very starting point, let's make it a book before you start writing it. So you make a book in your mind and then start building on it. And the second thing, apart from you knowing what you want to do, I think the second thing is to connect with people who have published before you, and participate to book talks. And then I did that, and then I was so much curious, and then talked to people who published, and then wanted to learn more about the dynamics of publications before even contracting the publishers, and then learn also what the publishers want, because for us, we might be passionate about something, but the publishers think mostly about the market, right? And so you have to connect your interest and the market. And then once that is established, you can now know how to sell your proposal, not to the people first, but to the publisher. Tell them why you think this is more relevant to you, to the world, but to the work as well. So it's kind of selling that or negotiating your presence in their space. And that, of course, takes time. So sometimes people get discouraged when they start, but I think it takes time But once you are connected with the right people, the right publishers, who find interest in your work, I think it goes smoothly. And when it goes well, it may take a year, it may take 2 years. For instance, my first book, it took me almost 5 years to publish it. And that was kind of a daily exercise. I'm writing, and sometimes you get tired of writing. And you feel like there is no inspiration in writing. And it's okay to take a break and then come back to it later on. So this is kind of at the book level. If you allow me to touch quickly also on journal level, and especially for the students who are connected. It depends on what you want to write, but I'll always encourage, especially my students, that the last project of the year, make sure that it is a long project, and a long project which is framed as an article. So we'll talk about the theoretical framework, which is the same thing that is applicable in certain graduate research and other publications. So start already exercising that. And if you do it well, then you have at least the foundation or the basis of your publication right there. And then the next step will be just expanding that research and connecting to the right venue or right journal or something like that. Yeah. But it is a process, and it's not an easy process. We have to be honest. Sometimes you might have your material ready, but the reviewers are not ready for that, and you have to wait for them. And especially, for instance, now with COVID and everyone works probably from home, and we have to balance life and work. Sometimes reviewers may be willing to work on your articles, but they feel like the mental well-being is not ready, so they might reject it. So it takes time. So we have to cooperate in the process by understanding that a rejection is not a rejection on you or rejection on your knowledge. Is that the situation doesn't allow the publisher probably to take this new project based on availabilities of reviewers or the priorities of the year. So that's kind of a process, but it's fun.
Thank you. I think that's all really valuable advice, especially for those who are very new to that process. So I have one question left. And so it's a two-parter. What should we consider going forward in 2021, considering issues of refugees, security, and humanitarianism? And do you have any insights specifically for the JMU community, which is located in Harrisonburg, which is a refugee resettlement community?
Well, yeah, so starting with the first question, I think there is this new and growing dynamic, which is known as Humanitarian Security and Development Nexus, stipulating that you can no longer address one by ignoring the other. So the advancement of this field requires that we use some complexity approach or complexity theory, meaning we should move forward together, separately, but together still. I will explain that. There are specific needs that are, for instance, on the security front, which are not very much on development front or humanitarian front. But the reality is, if those needs on security front are not addressed, they will have impact on humanitarian front, and they will also sometimes delay development. And if development is not well projected, it might lead to insecurity, and that insecurity will lead to humanitarian crisis. So there is this connection between this, and I think there is a need for scholars and the practitioners to develop frameworks that are more inclusive. So in other spaces, we talk about the comprehensive approach, right, to humanitarianism and security and peace. So that is one on the practice and the implementation side, including policy side. I think there is a need to rethink the strategies and develop more inclusive approach. But now to the GMU community, by the way, I live in Harrisonburg. So I learned to understand the communities and interact with people from all over the world. So, and JMU is exposed to a rich and diverse community. So what one needs to know first is that diversity is an addition to our values, and one should embrace it. Sometimes we see diversity as a threat, right? And a threat to uh, our way of doing things, because once you are very much comfortable, I always say change is dangerous, but we have to embrace change. So within the community, there are different expertise from people who came in as refugees, who have great knowledge and understanding. Some of them probably just kind of probably the barrier is language. And unfortunately, most of these resources are not, I guess, very much capitalized on and integrated in the system. And the first stage, which I think I could advocate for, if I have to do so, is to not only see Harrisonburg as a resettlement or community, but a community that has a chance to embrace new skills, new potentials, and integrate those potentials within refugee communities in our community, but also at the university level. I always say, what would you have the preparedness, for instance, of sending folks and people in study abroad program, right? We can still train, we can still explain, but sometimes we have people from those regions where students are about to go, and those people are right here. So why not connect with them, talking with them, and sharing kind of a cultural exchange program at the local level? So which I think can be done as well, of course, as well as sending people abroad. So that's what I think JMU can take advantage of. And also not being a university, but outside the community. I know we have many activities and outreach activities at JMU, which are very great, but I think we can still capitalize on that and maximize. So people should feel like JMU is their community, and JMU should feel like this community, it's also its community. It's not just an institution in Harrisonburg, but it's a community within this bigger community. Yeah.
Thank you. So we will now open it up to questions. As a reminder, if you are in the meeting, you can send your questions directly to the host and I will read them. If you're watching from YouTube, you can leave a comment below the video and we'll get to it. So, let's see. All right, Amy, are we getting any questions that we can share with everyone? So we got one question in that's asking, sorry, now I'm coming in, want to read them correctly. How can humanitarianism get past obstacles of global politics, such as failures to recognize humanitarian violations, etc.?
Okay. Would you do that? Would you mind repeating that question?
We are getting a sound in the, I don't know if it's feedback or, okay. So the question is, how can humanitarianism get past the obstacles of global politics, such as failure to recognize humanitarian violations, etc.?
I want to say that it's apolitical, but it's also political in the sense that its essence, it's first of all supposed to be apolitical because it's people-centered and that has to help people and then address crises, right? But it's very much political in the sense that you have political institutions, either government or supranational organizations such as the United Nations and other independent organizations funded by government that operates on the ground, right? So it's very difficult to disconnect that with the politics or the global politics because everything turns around that. And I have to explain this probably in a few words. When you have interstate conflict, this conflict is pushed and created by political actors, right? And humanitarian crises become a consequence of misunderstanding between political actors. So for you to address this humanitarian crisis in the long term and provide long-term solution, you definitely need to take into consideration this political dynamics that are happening and that are fueling conflict. So that's one. So it's very much difficult to say it in isolation. And of course, the second element is that agencies that operate in this field are politically oriented. So some of them are funded, as I said, by government. And of course, even if they tend to be neutral, but they're still connected to political entities, so we cannot ignore the politics involved. But what I think we can do within this space is to elevate our responses beyond political conflicts and above political conflicts. What do I mean by that? Understanding that our responses are serving people. So we have moral obligations to human beings and not to certain entities. And once we start bringing that humanity into responses, I guess the language of humanity is often common and similar, right? So the value of life, either we fight together, but we all value life. And once we start bringing that as our common ground, and then telling, for instance, different political actors, saying we need, for instance, to address this humanitarian crisis in South Sudan, because, hey, these are the kids who will be the leaders tomorrow. So we have children who cannot go to school, have been displaced for the past 5, 6 years. Who would want to see their children being displaced and not knowing where they will sleep tomorrow, and or being exposed to conflict all the time? So I think bringing that down to humanity will somehow dilute a lot bit political interest and will raise attention and bring another perspective to it. So that's why, for instance, when I was talking about diversity, I was also referring to diversity of perspective on how we see our responses. Is it just a humanitarian crisis that we address by fixing the politics, or it is a humanitarian crisis that we address by helping people and by saving lives and restoring human dignity? So those are some perspectives which I think could help to go beyond the global politics. But of course, humanitarian work and humanitarianism still operate within the global framing of politics.
Thank you. And thank you, Adric, for posing that important question. So now we've got them coming in. We'll hope to get to everyone's in this time. One question we have is, what is the main challenge for countries in Africa now related to institution building?
Well, I think the main challenge is the ability to recreate independent and original institutions. And many of these countries continues to live on the legacy of colonialism. And most of these institutions were part of the colonial institutions. So Africa within the 1960s got independences. Of course, we call it political independence, but not very much economic independence. But the institutions or the model and the relevance of institutions which were needed to be established still or stayed conform to global institutions which were basically a legacy of colonial approach to institution building. So now the challenge became the relevance of this institution within independent and specific contexts, which, for instance, was based on culture, ethnicity, and so on. So the disconnect between the model of institution and the dynamic of social life continues to jeopardize the future of institution building in Africa. That's why in the book, for instance, I focus more on Pan-Africanism, not as an ideology, one would say an anti-Western ideology, know that. But I focus on it as an original African ideology, which reflect to dynamics, cultural dynamics, social dynamics, religious dynamics, and even administrative dynamics of this many countries, and going back to them or integrate those dynamics with within the ongoing formal institution building process. It's key. So the challenge is that one. And I have also to say it's also a matter of leadership, right? Sometimes weak leadership becomes an obstacle to strong institutions. But some other times, trying to be more relevant to a Western world becomes also an obstacle to institutions. And within just 30 seconds, I'll explain that, if you allow me, is that, for instance, when we talk about democratization, and institutions are being built based on democratic values and principles. Sometimes many of these countries understand the meaning of democracy, but the dynamic of governance at the local level is not reflective to the principles of democracy within its system as we project it. So in a place where it's mostly kind of ethnicity or tribes where you have chiefs and so on, where people don't compete for power, it's kind of like a kingdom. You have the chief who passes and then it's the son who takes over. I'm talking about remote areas here. And then you come and tell them that, well, we have to have formal institutions and now the leader needs to be elected. Hey, that doesn't reflect their traditions, that doesn't reflect the local dynamics, and that takes time. And sometimes the goodwill of trying to transform many of these places create more trouble than good.
Right. So switching gears a little bit, Mary is asking, why did you choose to teach at JMU?
That's an interesting question. Well, I think, I don't know. You know, sometimes I think I would say, I liked JMU and JMU liked me, and then we liked each other, and then moved to JMU. So I think, to be honest, I was in North Carolina, and then I moved to Harrisonburg. And I knew a little about JMU, and so I did some research, and then connected with good people here, and then the conversation landed to an opportunity to contribute to this university. So, and then I liked it. In fact, when I started teaching, I was teaching politics of development, and of course, I combined with humanitarian interventions, and also taught a course on religion and society in the DRC. So here at JMU. So just so to speak, I think I found JMU being an interesting environment where also students are willing to expand their views of the world and academic spaces, which I found very interesting And yeah, so that was the process of choosing to join and teach at JMU.
Very good. I thought maybe, it would be the food or something, that's what we're known for. So,
Well, but I like local stores, coffee shops around here, especially around South Main. I'm always down there when I feel like, well, yeah, so I joined down there, and yeah, so I like the environment. It's quiet. Sometimes I drive at night around campus just to feel a good vibe. Yeah, yeah, it's a good environment.
So we have another question. What was your favorite part of the book writing process?
The favorite part was, in writing, sometimes you don't know when you finish, right? And so you still have these new ideas. And the favorite part, I think, became when my reviewers told me that we feel like the content is solid. We can change one or two pens and then it will be ready to go. I was so very much excited. So basically, that's it. That was, I don't know, this is not really writing process, but kind of finishing it. So it was really great. But in writing this book, I traveled a lot, so which was also fascinating. And I wrote in airplanes. I wrote in coffee shops. I wrote, I don't know, so almost everywhere, and that is favorite thing. It helped me to understand that there is no one single place where you have to do the whole work. So you can become more productive in airplanes. You can become more productive when sitting in the back of a car. And but in that dynamic, I have to say, the biggest fascinating part of it was when I was writing from North Carolina. So I moved from New Jersey to North Carolina to go write, because I felt like that would be a place to get more inspiration. I don't know how, but I was visiting many coffee shops. So, and I will visit this one for 3 months. So going there every day, meeting new people, discussing my work indirectly, and sometimes putting my work on the side, just talking to people. So that was a very kind of fascinating. It's the opportunity of writing, but also balancing writing and meeting new people. Yeah.
I have one more question. So COVID has touched on everything. It's the reason why we have to meet virtually tonight. And one audience member wanted to ask, how has COVID affected humanitarian crises? Has it led to decreases or delays in aid, support, policy making? How has it affected those things?
I think COVID created a global humanitarian crisis. So that's one. And two, I think it's brought awareness to those who felt like crises were only far from their borders and their shores. They realized that we all were the same boat, so able to struggle. I will give just a quick example here. Traditionally, the United States has been helping countries all over the place to address this humanitarian crisis. But when COVID hit here, we understood that somehow we were not very much well prepared to coordinate. So European humanitarian crisis and responses, we talk about coordination, for instance. And we can tell the struggle between the federal space with states and the local, and how to create a framework that will be more kind of inclusive and easy. And even when we talk about distribution of vaccines, for instance, that's an example. So I think COVID gave us the opportunity to reflect on our abilities and our limitations as international communities. But when it comes to the type of response, so some countries suffered most because they were not only looking at medical responses when it comes to public health issues, but they were, for instance, expecting food, they were expecting other logistics, but many borders were closed. So it created a delay, and of course, the right delay in the sense that every country has to take care of themselves first and manage their crisis. So yes, it definitely affected that. But it gives an opportunity to think different. I think yesterday or so, there is this group of world leaders who want to think of a framework of pandemic response. I don't know how effective that will be, but I think it just pushes people to understand that we should think humanitarianism different. We should think response to crisis differently. And it's no longer a matter of if we have to think about it. It's more about when and how to think about it. I think that's where the issue is. And within the whole framework of humanitarian response and support, I think the resources were now very limited, which I guess we should promote or advocate for more resources to many communities who are underprivileged. In terms of, for instance, getting vaccines, there is this politics, and this goes back to the questions of global politics or vaccine distribution, for instance. It shows disparities between communities. Some countries still haven't received a single dose of vaccine, and not because they don't need it, but because some powerful countries are prioritizing themselves. So this whole dynamic, I think COVID gives us the opportunity to be critical to ourselves and reflect on a proper way to reframe and refocus on our humanitarian understanding and humanitarian response.
Great, so that was all the questions we had from our audience. Thank you so much, Dr. Ilunga, for giving your perspective and for sharing your book. It was a treat to have read it. And thank you all for attending this event. We have a document in the chat where you can actually see where you can access the book if you'd like to get a copy. As a reminder, we're hosting a panel next week on women leaders in the mine action community. That's April 6th at 7 p.m. You can see Scissor's website to register. It's a similar format to tonight's event. And we will now be closing and actually posting a passport slide for those that will need it. It will be up for about 10 minutes. Thank you again and enjoy the rest of your evening.
Thank you.